Right. All right, good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, January 22nd, 2024. I've got 7 o'clock, so I'd like to go ahead and call the Committee of the Whole to order. We will start first with our Public Arts Policy Status Update and Discussion. Madam Mayor, any updates?
Only so far as you and I actually, Councilman, discussed last week. So as I shared with this council a few weeks ago, at the update, I said I was working with outside counsel. So the arts panel had convened. They had several meetings, provided a draft policy. What we were really looking for as part of that policy was something that would provide the parameters upon which art could be evaluated to determine whether or not it could go up in public spaces. In other words, here's a piece of art, here are the parameters. Does the art fit within the parameters? Yes or no, it can go up. The policy that the panel provided really spoke to what happens maybe before that, which is the mechanism through which it would be evaluated, not how it would be evaluated, the parameters. So I've been working with outside counsel to determine what those best course of action would be. Looking at the minutes from the panel's discussions and the communications that they had exchanged, I believe that those parameters were discussed and exchanged amongst the panel. So the question is, do I need to reconvene the panel to have them focus more on that, or can we take what they discussed, have outside counsel craft that, because it really is the more legalese portion of that, and then piece that with what the panel had provided. So that's what I'm working with outside counsel right now for that evaluation, and we'll update you in the next meeting.
And Madam Mayor, assuming that's the same outside counsel that was present at all the panel meetings?
That was, so combination of Aaron Glasgow and then also Donald Bry, who appeared before this council as well.
All right. Timeline on hopefully having this all completed? I know that's a broad question.
I can't give you a deadline and say by this date because I don't want to do that. But obviously, as soon as possible, time is of the essence for me. We do have artwork that we would like to get up in the parks when the weather breaks by spring. So making sure that we have these discussions wrapped up and finalized and a policy formalized so that we can have those things ready. And in the meantime, hopefully, the artwork can be prepared, weatherized, et cetera, that it needs to be, so it be suitable for being outdoors.
Well, thank you for the update, Madam Mayor. Any questions or comments from council?
Just a question,
President
Madam Mayor. What the committee recommended, would that recommendation be provided to council or presented at some point?
I will be, yes. Once I work through this portion of this with outside counsel, again, whether or not I need to either reconvene the panel or have the outside counsel draft that, then I would present to council, here's what we were proposing, get your input as well. So nothing would be finalized without actually having a conversation with this body.
Okay, thank you.
I guess as a quick follow-up, in your conversations with outside counsel, have they alluded to, I don't, for lack of a better word, why if they were present in those panel meetings, that component wasn't presented?
I have not had that conversation. Just reading the minutes, I think they wanted the panel to have organic conversations themselves, but I'm putting my own hypothesis in there, so.
Understood. All right. Anything else on this item?
Yes.
Oh, Ms. Padova, yes.
Is there anything, I know in the, during the holidays, the snowplows kind of got overlooked in this and we had to kind of not.
They weren't overlooked. We actually provided the plows, but the schools
Yes.
wanted to wait, so.
And then we weren't able to use the ones that Columbus Academy had designed, right, for holiday lights?
Correct.
So I'm just wondering if there are any other things coming up that
Not before
we
the
have done
springtime that I'm
historically
aware of.
that we would.
Correct. I'm not aware of anything, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have a terrible habit. I'm not aware of anything else before springtime.
Okay. And then if this wasn't done, I'm, on the top of my mind, I'm thinking like the Urban Arts Fair, would that have any, if this got delayed, would that have any effect on things like that?
Not in terms of the actual fair, that's a temporary event. I believe would be treated the same way that we would have treated Blues and Jazz Festival and Bright Blocks back then. What we're talking about, and keep in mind, is a more permanent installation of public art on public spaces. We're not talking about a temporary display during an event that only is a couple of days. So something like the Urban Arts Fair would not be impacted by that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have items from the Department of Public Service.
Me tonight. I
Good evening,
apologize.
Director Schultz.
Mr. Anvers was unavailable for tonight, and this is a pretty simple item that even I can handle. So the Department of Public Service has received funds over the last quarter for water meter fees. These funds are currently unappropriated and unencumbered. The Department of Public Service respectfully requests an ordinance for supplemental appropriations as itemized below. And that itemization is for $21,626 into the water fund.
Thank you, Director. Any discussion? All right, on for first on the 5th and then consent on the 19th? All right, thank you. Next up, items from the City Attorney. Madam City Attorney.
Thank you. So the agenda item is a traffic code review update. I am working my way through a comprehensive review of the traffic code right now. There has been a request to take another look at specifically the distracted driving ordinances and associated penalties. There's been a request to take a look at bicycle ordinances and make sure that is up to date and consistent with the rest of our code. And there's been a request to consider the implementation of an ordinance involving golf cart usage in low-speed and residential and low-speed commercial areas. So I am working to do all of those things in one comprehensive memo. So I would ask that this come back before council. I've been meeting with several members of the community with regards to the distracted driving and the bicycle ordinances, working on a meeting with Chief Spence as well. So trying to get all the input in, and I would like the guidance of council with some of those action items as well. So I am working on a full comprehensive memo to outline the options available for council to discuss, and would ask that this return to committee.
Did you have a particular time frame you'd like to bring this back, or?
I believe the next committee of the whole meeting will give me sufficient time to complete my red lines. It's already mostly complete. I just want to make sure I get input from everybody before I put that together in writing for the council to consider.
February 12th for committee, please, Mr. Clerk. Any comments at the moment from my colleagues? Thank you, Madam City Attorney.
Thank you.
Moving right along here, items from council office. We have a motion to approve seasonal employment for a council office intern. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did put together an item for your consideration, which is a motion to approve seasonal employment for Charlie Schneider as council office intern through the MORPC Summer Internship Program. This would be at a rate of $15.99 per hour for an anticipated number of 32 hours per week. The MORPC internship runs May 14th through August 16th. MORPC does provide training for interns that are selected through the host city. And if hired by council, the intern would be paired with the cohort of 3 to 4 other interns here within the city. So they would have an opportunity to network and to learn about what is happening elsewhere within the city and not just our office too. If you do have specific questions, I would request that you filter those through Council President, any opportunity to meet with an executive session to discuss employment purposes.
Any discussion? President Bowers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Clerk Van Meter. As noted in the report, we did interview Mr. Schneider. It was a lovely interview, and I just wanted to share with the body that Mr. Schneider came in extraordinarily prepared and knowledgeable about the city. His experience in Lima He was able to correlate directly to Gahanna. They're comparably populated, population-wise, they're comparably situated, and he had a strong experience with his service in Lima. So, but happy to have any other conversation or discussion, either offline or in executive session.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, Ms. Bowers. I also want to thank Senior Director Volmer for your coordination with Mr. Van Meter, and look forward to having an intern in council office. Yes, Ms. Bowers.
Just go ahead. It could go on consent. I was just going to
Oh,
say, it
yes,
could go
thank you.
on consent
Yep.
if it, unless you want to not refer it to consent and then, or maybe refer it to consent and then we can withhold it from consent if there is a request to.
I'm comfortable with consent on this. Yeah. All right. Consent, please, Mr. Clerk, for the 5th, please. Next item, we have a resolution recognizing February 2024 as Black History Month. Councilmember Jones.
Yes, so I worked with Clerk Van Meter to draft a resolution honoring Black History Month next month, and have invited Dr. Danja Thomas, a teacher at the high school, and some students to receive the resolution. The theme for next month happens to be African American in the arts, so it seemed to make sense to also invite some of the students from diaspora as well to present that resolution. So there is text available for the resolution and open to feedback. Jeremy, I did notice one thing, second whereas from the bottom that we would just want to capitalize, but we can address that. But other feedback?
Thank you, Ms.
From
Jones.
colleagues.
Any discussion? Well, thank you both very much for your efforts. It sounds like it'll be a special evening on the 5th, so thank you very much. Consent okay for that, and we can do the presentation like we have at the top of the agenda? No, thank you. And then, last on our Committee of the Whole agenda, we have a resolution recognizing Mr. T's legacy on Gahanna's food economy. Mr. Renner.
Yes, thank you. I apologize that I don't have a draft completed for everybody to review. But holistically, as everybody knows, Mr. T's is closing their door on February 3rd, Saturday, February 3rd. And I've been talking long and hard with the Armstrong family to understand everything, their point of view, what's happening to them. It's always a sad thing to see a small family business shutter their doors. And so I want to be able to take a moment to recognize the impact that Mr. T's has actually had on the village of Gahanna, or the city of Gahanna. They've been around for a while, many of you know, and they shuttered their doors for a little bit and took a pause and then came back. And the impact to the Gahanna area, and especially to the west side, and especially to Mifflin Township, is huge. And so that's the story that I want to try to help tell on behalf of the Armstrong family. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. Any discussion on this item? Consent agenda okay for this? Mrs. McGregor, did you have something?
When I first read this, I thought Mr. T, and I was thinking like, Mr. T from the A-Team.
18.
I just read it, and then I read on the food economy. I thought, okay, now I know what you're talking about.
I suppose if Mr. T from the A-Team did show up, it would probably be a boon for the Gahanna food economy, so. All right.
The Armstrong family will be here on February 5th for that. So.
Wonderful.
Maybe titling it Mr. T's Pizza might help.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Marty Armstrong, who worked with, she's a longtime employee for the
good,
city,
yeah,
with the city. She worked,
Who? I'm sorry.
Marty Armstrong was a longtime employee for the city. Do you remember, was it finance? Personnel? HR? I don't remember. She worked here forever.
Finance, right?
Pardon?
Finance.
Yes, right, yeah.
Sorry.
Consent on the 5th, okay, for this one then. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody, for your efforts on that. Anything further for Committee of the Whole? I'm, 7:15, I don't want to run too long here.
We're saving ourselves.
Yes, all right. Nothing further for the committee. We'll turn things over to Chair Snetcher for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Van Meters, give me a thumbs up. All right, we're good? Okay. Let's kick off Finance Committee for January 22nd, 2024. Two items up for discussion, both from the Department of Finance. Before I dive in, I guess I'll ask if the administration, perhaps Madam Mayor, do you have any opening comments in regards to these two related items?
I do this evening. Yes, I usually don't, but tonight I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So the discussion that we are about to have tonight really is the culmination of 2 years' worth of work, ongoing public conversations that have happened here in these chambers, as well as throughout the community. Harken back to 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago this month that Council and the administration began holding a series of workshops at the Senior Center to talk about the critical facility needs that we were facing, with the goal of, at a minimum, walking away with a long-term plan as to how we could begin to address the challenges that we were having. And although it was not necessarily planned to unfold as it did, we experienced what I was calling a perfect confluence of circumstances when we stumbled upon 825 Tech Center Drive while we were having those workshops and having those discussions. With the unanimous approval of council, we actually purchased 825 Tech Center Drive back in October of 2022 to move forward with solving 3 facility needs in one. Following the purchase of the building, we hired our design team. You've met them several times here, our team at MSA Design, as well as our construction management partners at Alford. And the design process began in earnest in January of 2023. So for the past year, we have spent countless hours, and there's been a great deal of work, evaluation, and analysis to get to this point this evening. This evening's discussion really is the next step in that process to bringing this project to fruition. 2 weeks ago, the administration presented the overall design of 825 Tech Center Drive to council, and I believe a couple of you had the opportunity to go down to MSA's office and take a look at some of the things there as well. And so 2 weeks ago, we also requested permission to bid the construction and renovation of the work that is associated with this project. This evening, we will continue that conversation by presenting the overall project budget for 825 Tech Center Drive, as well as the legislation to bond the project. We have a variety of presenters here for you this evening as we walk through this. First, we will begin with an introduction of the legislation. That will be presented by Director Vollmer. Brian Cooper of Baker Tilly, a familiar face in these chambers, who represents our city's municipal advisor, will discuss and explain the basics of a general obligation bond. Has been a little while since we talked about that, since the purchase of 825. Director Schultz, who, as you all know, has been the project manager for 825, will then present the overall project budget. He will then be followed by Director Burry, who will also discuss the bond strategy as well as the financial impacts of this project upon the city's finances and budget. And then Director Vollmer will conclude with the presentation of a discussion of next steps and dependencies. Our team partners at MSA and Alford are also here this evening, along with our entire project team, to answer any questions that you might have as we go through this discussion tonight. And with that, with your indulgence, I will turn it over to Director Vollmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Miranda?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Jedwin. On behalf of the project team, I'm honored to introduce and request an ordinance to authorize the issuance and sale of general obligation bonds to construct, renovate, and improve the land, building, and associated utility infrastructure as identified in the final design at 825 Tech Center Drive in the maximum principal amount of $68 million with a maximum maturity of 30 years. The actual issuance may be less than $68 million in 30 years, but may not exceed these amounts. This amount reflects the refinancing of the 2023 note for the original purchase of the building in the amount of $8.5 million. As the mayor discussed, Director Burry and Mr. Cooper from Baker Tilly will go into greater detail on the financing after Senior Director Schultz presents the total project budget. The accompanying legislation was drafted by Ms. Allison Binkley from Squire and approved by the City Attorney's Office. Ms. Binkley is in the audience this evening and available for questions as we move through tonight's presentation. The administration respectfully requests this ordinance be passed on emergency in order to refinance the short-term note and to move the project forward in order to line up bond issuances with the construction schedules. The second action is a request for supplemental appropriations from the unreserved fund balance of the general fund and the capital improvement fund. The administration has identified available unreserved fund balances in both funds to provide some cash financing. To provide a maximum maturity of 30 years for the bond, a weighted average calculation is performed based on the estimated useful life of the underlying assets being purchased with the bonds. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment have an estimated useful life of approximately 10 years, while all other components have a useful life of 30 years or more. To that end, we are requesting to use $3 million of available capital improvement unreserved fund balance for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. This will ensure a maximum maturity of 30 years for the bonds and allows for better cash flow management to meet debt service requirements while accomplishing other projects identified in the capital improvement plan. In addition, we would request a supplemental appropriation of $7 million of available general fund unreserved balances to pay for allowances and contingencies. Most of these fees have the potential of decreasing as the first stage of the project is awarded and the second stage is issued for bid. Using cash for these two parts of the project reduces the need to borrow and pay interest for expenses that may or may not occur. In summary, the administration is respectfully requesting an ordinance for supplemental appropriations in the amount of $3 million from the Capital Improvement Fund and $7 million from the General Fund, in addition to passing the bond legislation as described on emergency. Next on the agenda, Mr. Cooper from Baker Tilly will briefly discuss general obligation bonds. Following, Senior Director Schultz will review the project budget. Mr. Schultz will pause after his presentation for project budget questions, and we would ask for bonding and financing questions to be held until the conclusion of that portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Miranda. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Cooper with Baker Tilly. I'm a municipal advisor. I've been working with the city for many years. Happy to be here. A beautiful project, very exciting. Administration asked me to cover a general obligation bond with you all, and very simply put, a general obligation is a full faith and credit pledge of the city when it comes to borrowing. Basically, when you issue these bonds, the bondholders and the repayment of the bonds are secured by all legally available assets and funds of the city. This is the most common type of obligation that a city like Gahanna would issue. It's the most secure from a credit perspective and offers the highest possibility of the highest credit rating for the city. And it will also produce the lowest borrowing cost. There are other options, but when we look at the market and market acceptance, this gives you the best foot forward with the issuance of debt. That being said, the ordinance that we're looking at also pledges and makes available on a discretionary basis specific city revenues, including water system revenues, sanitary system revenues, stormwater, tax increment, and most importantly, the city's income tax. The city has a very strong income tax, and as we know, a good portion of that income tax will be allocated to capital and debt repayment. And so to the extent the city makes available income taxes or other revenues, then the millage levy that comes with the general obligation will not be levied on the city and on the residents and property within the city. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm going to pass it over to Kevin.
Thank you, folks. So my portion of the project here, or my portion of the presentation this evening, is to basically review in great detail the project budget as it relates to the total project budget as it relates to the project that you guys are very, very familiar with at this point. We're going to go over the budget. We're We're going to go over the budget and the budget different categories. So what you're going to see on the next few slides, 8 or 10 slides or so, are each of the categories that go into making up the total budget, right? So we're going to look at the building purchase, right? That's something that Director Volmer already spoke about when she introduced the legislation. We're going to go through construction and what the construction budget is for the project, and then a few different other categories and things that get a little bit confusing, but I really want you folks and then even the public that might be watching at home to get a good understanding of the amount of work that's gone into developing the cost estimates and the budget as it relates to this particular project. So we're going to go over things in fairly good detail as it relates to alternates, allowances, FF&E, right? We already referred to that earlier. You'll learn what that is as we get a little deeper into the project. I'll leave a little mystery there. Value management, not necessarily value engineering, but value management and what that means to this particular project. And then contingencies and soft costs, right? So what does it take to deliver the project in total? You're going to see a few different numbers. You've already heard I believe a $68 million not to exceed bond amount. But then you're going to see some other numbers that are going to potentially get a little bit confusing, but we'll go slow enough and we'll obviously have plenty of time for questions and conversation as it relates to all those different numbers and what those things mean as we go through this bonding process. So bear with us for a little bit and hopefully when we get to the question portion, we'll get to the question and answer portion here. So first we're going to start with the overall purchase of the building and then the construction estimate costs, right? So the building cost us, that's something that we've already paid for. We've paid short-term notes for, or we have short-term notes for, that are being rolled into this particular bond issuance that's in the legislation currently. So we're going to take those short-term notes and turn them into long-term notes, if you would. And then we actually have the construction estimate on the second line there. Construction estimate for this particular project is about, at this particular moment, we'll round up in these numbers, $51 million. But then we're also going to take a value management number out of that particular number, right? And when you add up all those numbers, you come to a total purchase and construction cost on this project of $57 million. Okay, and again, my slides are going to compound and add up to a number that is bigger than this particular number. This is simply the purchase of the building and the construction of the building at $57 million. Okay? Oop, so yep, one there. Value management, right? And why is value management important? This slide was actually a little bit deeper in the presentation, and I moved it up on purpose into a higher category. And we refer to this as value management at this particular point. Maybe a term that you might be familiar with is more value engineering, right? Value engineering is something, in my opinion, that takes place at the end of a project. We recognize what we design, what we want to construct, why we want to construct it. We have a budget, and all of a sudden we've missed our budget, right? What we've done on this particular project is we've sat down since January of last year. You know, we've discussed with the design team, and long before that, for that matter, what the actual program for this particular building or what the city's needs were from those three distinct spaces. And we really began to value and manage the value of this particular project from the beginning and not at the end, right? So we have received 4 different budgets on this particular project. You guys are somewhat familiar with the different milestones as it relates to the design process, right? We had schematic design, we had a couple of budgets in design development, and then ultimately we ended up with a refined budget, if you would, and where our numbers are based on just last week. So January 15th, we were delivered what I guess I'm going to refer to as a final budget on this particular project. So what we've been able to do is take about $3 million, $2.7 million out of the program or out of the construction budget of the project in a variety of different ways. Now, I guess the easiest and best way to say this is that we've managed the square footage of the building. If you guys look at our earlier presentations, the square footage of the building was about 140,000 square feet. We're at about 127,000 square feet at this particular point in time. Right, so we've shrunk up the size of the multipurpose room. We've right-sized the first floor of the police department and the basement, right? Those two things are congruent, if you would, because they sit on top of each other. the north walkway, right? We've pulled the north walkway into the building, again, maximizing the use of the existing building and not building additional square footage because, maybe of a cool architecture feature or something in that regard. We are maintaining the existing ingress and egress of the site, so that existing curb cut on Tech Center Drive, that was proposed to actually be moved in the early iterations of the design, but we actually chose to keep it. One is a cost savings, but two, we can design around it, and it wasn't as big of an impediment. We felt like it didn't need to be moved at some particular point in time. The other thing, and I'll go back to the top of the bullets there, we've actually gone from a fully officed environment, if you would, to a largely open office environment. This is across each and every department at this particular point in time. Basically, you have a director in a department that would be in an office, and then the majority of staff, if you would, have been moved into an open office concept. This is a concept that, in working with both MSA and Alfred, they've said in other municipal complexes of this size and scope that is the trend that most municipalities are going towards. We think that it improves the quality of the space. We think that it improves the collaborativeness of the space and the collaborativeness of the staff at the same time. And then we've made other accommodations that we may have seen on the drawings a couple of weeks ago when we went over the design review that also add to the need, if you would, for an employee to have a personal conversation maybe with their doctor, or if they're on a training call, that there's a room similar to maybe the study rooms that are at the library that they're able to go to. And at that particular point, don't have exact numbers on what each one of these items saved us that add up to the 2.7 million, right? Because these things happen quickly. But I believe that one was anywhere from about 700 to about 1.1 million dollars in cost savings over the extent of the project. So again, we've really been managing the value of this particular budget and this particular project as we've moved through it consistently. Now, allowances. Now, this is where we get a little bit technical, and don't for any reason think that if you don't understand something, please let me go back and re-explain it. But allowances are items that are not yet fixed costs, right? So, but they're also included in the construction estimate. So if you look at the bottom of the slide and in my notes, sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, the actual list there is not a complete list of items. I just wanted to illustrate some of the items that are on these lists. The first top part of this slide says cost certainty with the bid process. So as we go to bid, as Alfred goes to bid on many of these items, some of these items become certain and locked in for cost. So right now there is only an allowance in the budget. The example that I will give you here is that at one particular point in time, the covered parking with the solar array on top, I believe that was estimated at about $1.5 million, and there was an allowance in an early budget that had that number identified. Those fine folks from Alfred, they would go out, they would solicit vendor information, which would give them the ability to refine that number and then put a hard number in the budget. So that is no longer an allowance. That has been moved to the budget. And at that particular point in time, I believe we went from about $1.5 million for covered parking to I think a cost of anywhere between $800,000 and $900,000. So now you kind of see a little bit how those allowances work. They generally would estimate an allowance somewhat high, right? So it reduces our risk on the project. So that number is in the budget. But ultimately, as bids come in and these costs become known, that's actually when we do a construction contract that you guys would be you guys would be approving a firm number for some of the things that remain on the list, like firing range, equipment, and air handlers. $1.5 million. That's what the allowance currently is in the budget. Some of the other material selections, right? Do you want this quality carpet, or do you want this other type of flooring potentially, right? So we see some of those things, and those things are in, I really hate to use the word draft stage. They're better than draft, but they're just not finalized at this particular moment. Then there's some things on the second portion of the slide, cost certainty as the project progresses. The best thing that's on this particular list is the middle bullet there, the emergency responder radio system. Okay, that's a system that when a first responder was to walk into a building and the building is made of a bunch of brick and steel, that their radio isn't capable of communicating outside of those walls. So So they carry this allowance so that as the building is constructed, the building can then be tested as to whether or not we need to install a system like that, or are the radios sufficient, and is there good public safety communications outside of the building? If there is, we wouldn't be spending the $137,000, $140,000. If it isn't, we would be spending that particular money at that particular point in time. And that's why those things become more apparent and the costs become more certain as the project advances. As you can see, there is a tremendous amount of discrepancy between things that will be known during the bid process and things that will continue as allowances as the project advances, right? It's, basically 3/4 to 1/4. Next topic is even more riveting, I promise. And that is with bid alternates. Okay, this is something that the folks behind me stressed that bid alternates are a little bit confusing. They're very confusing. They almost broke me on Thursday when we were having this conversation over at 8:25. But bid alternates are portions of the project that are chosen after the final numbers have been received and are optional for construction, okay? So some of these, you'll notice the plus and the minus next to the title of some of these items. This is a comprehensive list of things that are on the bid alternates. Anything that is a minus would come out of the budget, and anything that is a plus would be in addition to the budget. So basically, that $320,000 addition to the budget are only the items where there is a plus sign associated with them. All of the negatives are already in the budget. So when you look at the 1-bay Sallyport, we have a design that basically says build us, or what would it cost to build a 2-bay Sallyport? Give us an alternate if you were only to build 1 bay, right? So then if we chose, if the budget numbers are not coming in where we would like to see them, and maybe we're a little bit high, these are items that we actually have the ability to scale back on in order to reduce cost. If at the same time budgets are coming in lower, then we have the ability to add in that $319,000 potentially, or select items on that list, if you would, in order to, we wouldn't necessarily be increasing the budget because of slides that I will get to next. But the total impact for the plus items on that list is just $320,000 on, again, a budget, construction budget of $51 million, right? So we are talking pretty much less than 1% of the overall budget. You might ask, why aren't these items just in there right now? Just because it's such a nominal amount of money on the overall budget. I think, excuse me, the point where we're at in this particular project, at this particular point, we chose to leave them intentionally as alternates right now. Because again, I just got budget numbers on January 15th, and those conversations haven't been fully realized at this particular point, so they still remain as bid alternates. Sorry. FF&E, I told you I would tell you what that was. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment, right? So furniture, fixtures, and equipment is budgeted as a budgeted line item for tangible items such as furniture, decor, and appliances, right? You can think about any type of equipment. In this picture alone, you see a variety of different furniture, obviously. You got the chairs, you got the tables, you got the dais chairs. But then think of, you see the embossed Gahanna logo in the background. That is something that would be considered a fixture, if you would. Those dehumidifiers that thankfully are not on right now, creating a whole bunch of noise, those things would be considered equipment as they reside in this particular room here. Things that were in kitchenettes, as an example, microwaves, refrigerators, any of that type of equipment is also included in this particular line here. That's FF&E. Contingencies, okay, and this is where I think the bond legislation talks a lot about contingencies. There is a fair amount of contingency that is taken into this particular project. We list the 4 major contingencies. The first being the design contingency. That's 3% contingency on the project total. Escalation and estimate contingency. So that is something that's where. That's a contingency that we would be utilizing if the bids were to come in high, if you would, right? This is the bucket in which we would pull from if the bids came in higher than we had anticipated on a whole, not necessarily for individual services. construction contingency, the 2% construction contingency, and then about a 4%, if you would, owner's contingency. So these different contingencies, one is for MSA, two are for Elford, and then one is for the city. These add up to $6.8 million. And these things are what I'm going to refer as variable. And I added it in this particular slide so that you can see, right? So as we get towards the end of the design of the building, in this particular instance, the design of the building, we're able to return some of that contingency money, right? So we're already getting a credit on the design contingency. We're going to reduce that by $1 million off of the top right now, bringing the total number of or amount for contingencies to $5.8 million, right? The other note that I would make on the escalation and estimate contingency, we will know exactly where that contingency stands at bid package number 2 that we talked about, right? So we have construction contract number 1, about 1/3 of the project, and construction contract number 2, bid package number 2 for the remainder of the project. We will know exactly where that particular 3% lands when that contract comes before you folks here in the coming months. And then as the project progresses and the folks from Elford who are building the project, they realize that they're not using a lot of contingency at this particular point, that number will slowly begin to roll back to the city. And then there's obviously the potential to reduce the construction contingency and then the owner's contingency as the project moves forward. One of the lines that I'll also make note of here is that inside of the owner contingency, we were carrying on the original project costs about $1.3 million in technology costs. We've reduced that from $1.3 million to about $500,000, and we've put that $500,000 in the owner's contingency because there is a large amount of money that's already in or covered, if you would, for technology items in the construction budget. That would include things like wiring or cameras or technology systems that you would use, projectors in these particular in council chambers, any large format monitors that may be in conference rooms and those types of things, security cameras, detention equipment, right? So we've taken that number, we've reduced it. We've actually increased technically we've increased FF&E a little bit. But we've taken that technology line and eliminated it and taken $500,000 of it and put it in the owner's contingency. Last slide here, and then we're going to get to the total cost slide. But soft costs, right? So what does it cost in order for us to actually construct the building, right? We have design and engineering services. We have the construction management services, but then obviously there's a whole other host of insurances and other fees that we need to pay in order to actually construct the project. Fees, overhead, and profit. Yes, people need to make money, and then ultimately bonding on the project itself. Not bonding as it relates to what Director Berry is going to talk about next, but that's bonding on the project itself. Again, all of those soft cost fees, that's about 10% of the overall project budget at the $5.8 million or so. Yeah, so soft costs. I guess I would refer to that as the cost of doing business and the cost of bringing a project to fruition. So when we add all these things up, right? So building purchase again, $8.75 million. I already think I have a $250,000 error in here because I'm counting a cash consideration, and we paid $8.5 million for the building because we brought $250,000 in cash. So I think I'm double counting $250,000 in the purchase of the building. I have to go and double check my math on that. But then we have construction, obviously the value management. Again, the allowances are already included in the above construction total number. The bid alternates, I didn't mess with the bid alternates. I left those out because I do not believe that those will end up adding to the budget. But then FF&E contingencies and soft costs bringing us to a total project cost of the $972 million. Pause there, just to pause there. Okay, so things that we did talk about these a couple weeks ago. This is largely a recap of some of the things that Mr. Hall presented from MSA presented 2 weeks ago when we talked about some things that are impacting the overall budget, right? So site improvements, stormwater detention systems and the improvements there in the parking lot, external building security enhancements, utility relocations, a secure perimeter, right? All of these things are adding to the overall project, but also enhancing the project at the same time. I think the previous slides that we showed a couple weeks ago, I think it said challenges equal opportunities. And this is, again, largely a recap on that slide. Again, needing to upgrade the entire structure to essential facility code requirements, so structural improvements along with storm shelter requirements. And then some of the green initiatives that we talked about as well as it relates to the project. Solar array on the covered parking as a few examples, of EV chargers, lighting and room control upgrades throughout the building. And then overall, the quality and daylighting of the space. We really do believe that the quality of this space enhances the experience that folks have when they come into the building to do the good work of the city. That is a sustainable effort there that is counted towards those goals and objectives for green initiatives, and cannot be understated. Most of the offices are oriented to the internal side of the building, just like it is now, with a lot of those open office areas open up to the windows in the outside environment. Let a lot of that natural light penetrate well into the building, again, improving the quality of the space. There's a lot of public, and when I say public, semi-public, because there are maybe more on the second and third floor, but the semi-public spaces where folks can go and gather and have small meetings, collaborative type environments. There's plenty of conference room space. If you know us around this particular building, we're always fighting for a conference room, and oftentimes we may be using these tables just to meet at, on a Tuesday afternoon because there's no other place to meet. But all of those problems are solved in this particular facility. Don't know what my next slide is. Oh, my next slide is skipped. So outside funding possibilities, right? So obviously, we do go shake some trees. I will remind everybody that 200 South Hamilton Road, this particular property, has been identified as a commodity, if you would, for the city, that once it is no longer needed for us, that it is something that adds to the financial resources of the city, if it was to be sold. Grant dollars, we already have in hand energy efficiency block grant and about $80,000. That goes towards lighting upgrades throughout the facility. We did apply through the regional MORPC grant application for charging and fueling infrastructure, fancy way of saying EV chargers. We did put in a portion of that particular project at $1 million, and we just did learn, not this past Friday, but the Friday before that MORPC did not receive that grant. That's why I just wanted to show it that we have obviously shook that tree, but no fruit was available. I do know that the state of Ohio received 2 grants, none of which were in the central Ohio area. We will continue to shake trees, especially as it relates to some of those energy type initiatives and EV chargers. There does seem to be some other monies out there and available to us. And then the last thing on our list at this particular moment in time is federal tax credits. And that is a reimbursement process. And I know it says 30 and 40%, but then it also clarifies it on specific portions of the project, right? So the solar array on the covered parking as an example. We could receive a reimbursement of 30 to 40%, depending on exactly where those materials were sourced. And that is a reimbursement that we would see after the project was constructed. Right now, we're valuing that at, I would say, a little bit low at this particular point in time, especially EV chargers as an example. They do qualify. So we do need to go back to and do some of that analysis. Baker Tilly, different arm of Baker Tilly, is doing some analysis for us on exactly what these federal tax credits look like and how to apply for them, how you can actually qualify for closer to the 40%. Things like unions and then apprenticeships and other things go in to qualify you for higher percentages. So that is also still under evaluation. And again, as time allows and as we work on this project and work with outside folks, grant folks, we will identify opportunities. I will say that many folks that we've talked to as far as grant opportunities go for facilities, grant opportunities for facilities are not as robust as they have been in years past, maybe even decades past, just because of the environment that we're in. We may look at specific items again, like EV chargers or some sustainable initiatives that would end up getting us a return. But at this point, those are some of the items that are being investigated. I'm going to go back to this particular slide and pause and then ask for questions as it relates to the construction of the project budget. We'll still remember to hold those bond questions until Director Burry and Mr. Cooper have an opportunity to present more in a couple minutes here.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for a very thorough overview. Anything from council with regard to the construction or construction costs? Mrs. McGregor?
I don't know if this is the cost, but how much did they decrease the square footage of the multi-purpose room?
Multipurpose room, I don't know the exact square footage number. I know the multipurpose room went from a capacity of 175 people to 150 people. So we reduced it by 25 persons in a banquet setting. And the original plan was that the room would be able to be split in three, so three individual rooms, and now it only has one partition in it.
Anything further from council on this particular topic? Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you, Director Schultz, very much for the presentation and for all your time on this again. Just to clarify, one quick question. The multipurpose room that was referenced, that Mrs. McGregor also brought up, that would be in the senior community center wing
Yes,
of the
ma'am.
project? Okay. And it doesn't sound like it was a really sizable reduction. just-
No, and that's a great point, right? So when we looked at that value management and understanding where we could save, we never compromised the actual program of the facility itself, right? Compromising the program would have been eliminating the multipurpose room or shrinking it to a level that was maybe smaller than what we have over there now, right? And all of the items that we value manage, we never compromised the actual intent of the program. We did make some smaller reductions, again, in that particular instance, about 25 people.
And I think this is a little bit more of a comment, but an opportunity for you to weigh in a little bit more on this too. One of the things that I've been really excited to see about this project, and it's really kind of came through in our last meeting with MSA, is that this really isn't just for city staff or elected officials. This really is about creating community space. Could you talk a little bit more about the programming and how this will really serve as a community hub and will accommodate more than just kind of what we have currently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the unique things about the design of the building is the need to secure the facility, make it more secure than this facility, but yet, if you remember the goals and objectives, they flashed up there briefly this evening. But it's to create that warm and welcoming and inviting type environment for the public to come, the public to do the business of the city, but at the same time also potentially come and maybe spend a couple of hours in the main lobby of the building, whether it's, like a co-hatch type environment where they're able to bring their laptop, connect to Wi-Fi and work from that particular environment. I think some of the things that you see in the uniqueness of the facility is that long. You actually see one of the corridors. The entire facility is interconnected, if you would. So you can get, if you happen to go into the police department, but you were supposed to be in the senior center, and it was rainy or snowy or 20 degrees out like it was last week, you'd actually be able to walk through the entire facility in order to get from one portion of the building to the other portion of the building. Stopping in different places in order to engage with, maybe it's one of you folks who wants to engage with a constituent. Maybe it's one of staff who need to engage with a citizen about a building permit or an issue or a challenge that they were having on a particular matter. I'm not quite sure. Ms. Miranda knows where a better picture is. This particular picture here, again, we're on the second floor, right? So we are on a secure floor, if you would, but we're overlooking that main lobby area. If you notice that long corridor down where the bricks are on the right-hand side of the picture, that's the corridor that leads to the senior center. The windows for the customer service area are directly behind that post that you see there on the right. So when you walk into this facility, you know where you should be, why you should be. If you're coming to pay a utility bill, you know exactly where you end up. Maybe you just end up there because well, maybe you're waiting for a court appearance and you're just going to hang out here in the lobby for a few minutes before you go meet with the folks down in the court system. So we do feel that it is warm and welcoming and inviting, a quality space, not just for the folks who come to work each and every day in the building, but also for the visitors that we would be engaging with. The quality of that outdoor space, I think that's something that we talked about on Friday with MSA, and really having that park-like feel. Maybe there's a trailhead, right? There is that bike trail that runs through the front, right? So somebody could show up with their bike, they can park their vehicle. If they need to use a restroom, they can come into the public building and actually, take a little bit of a break, hop on their bike, and then continue on the trail. But then the quality of that space out front as well, whether it's, eating lunch or, again, coming down and it really becoming more of a hub for the community as opposed to just what City Hall here is currently, right? It's more of a destination in order to come pay a ticket or do the business of the city, whereas this we would see as more of a resource for the city and the citizens of the city to be able to utilize.
If I could also add, since there were some specific questions referenced with regard to the multipurpose room, one of the concerns we consistently hear from the seniors right now is when there's a meeting in the senior center, we either have to juggle it with when there is a senior center program happening versus when there isn't. You can use the senior center for a meeting because there's no programming, or there can't be any programming because somebody else is using it for a community meeting, et cetera. That will not be the case in this new facility. The multipurpose room will be able to be shut off, so to speak, from the senior center, so the seniors can continue to meet in the center. There could be a community meeting in the multipurpose room. When we have an all-staff meeting, when we have a town hall, when we have an open house, we don't have a meeting space big enough to welcome the community in. That multipurpose room will allow us to have that space without negatively impacting the operations of the senior center. So those types of additives throughout this project, I think, further enhance the ability of this building to really, truly welcome the community in and make it the people's building that we've continually talked about for the past year and a half.
Anything further from council?
Yeah, I have a couple more
Sure.
questions on this. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And I'm really excited for the community to see more of the renderings, particularly of the public spaces. I wanted to follow up about the open office concept as well, and see how, have you gauged staff feedback on this and staff reactions on the open office concept, and how are those conversations going?
We have, to a certain degree. All the directors are aware. They've had conversations with their staff. It is a cultural change. It is sometimes a little bit difficult to move that shift. I know I've had many personal conversations throughout the building where, I'm going to pitch a tent in my cube. Literally, that was a conversation. I think there's a little bit of trepidation. I think people are somewhat taking some of the spaces that they currently work in, which is about a 5x5 or a 6x6 cubicle, right? And the cubicles that are being built in this particular facility are more spacious, I will say. So they will be more comfortable to work in. We did just do some additional cube work down in like Parks and Recreation, or you guys would walk up past some at utility billing, and you can feel they are they're tight. It's tight spaces to work in because of the constraints on this particular building, and we're not taking those things with us, right? So I think that the benefits of the space, the daylighting, and some of the things that I've already spoke about far outweigh some of the issues and challenges that folks would have. There's also, frankly, if there's a conference room that's full, and you happen to sit in a cubicle and you need to take that personal phone call, you're probably going outside to take that personal phone call. Inside of this particular building, and I'm going to shoot myself right now because I don't have it with me, it's at home, but there are a number of those type of study rooms like that are over at the library for folks to go in and even just have a personal conversation, maybe with a doctor or a spouse or whatever it might be about. Again, if you're on a training, right, and trainings can be a little bit disruptive to the entire floor because you like to listen to your training very loud. There are those types of accommodations that are made. There's a lot of even open space throughout the building, but yet still private enough for you to have again, a personal conversation. Maybe you just need a minute, right? There's quiet rooms throughout the facility, whether those are on the PD side or on the administrative side. There's nursing rooms in a variety of different locations throughout the building as well. So I think the number of amenities that we have in this building far outweigh the the open office concept. Again, it is going to be a little bit of a cultural shift for some folks who are currently in an office that would actually be moving into a cubicle. But again, I think the benefits of a brand-new facility far outweigh some of those other challenges. We do also have, a staff meeting tomorrow, an all-staff meeting, that's going to discuss some of these things in a little bit greater detail too, so we can report back as to how some of that went.
Okay, great. And then I, one more question for Mr. Schultz before we shift it back to finance, but I recognize that you said you just received a budget maybe a week ago. And I recognize that there will be fluctuations in that, and they are estimates at this point. But will you be able to publish a comprehensive document that breaks down that 51 million in construction costs?
By discipline, or like electrical versus plumbing versus HVAC? I mean,
Whatever your best practices are, I wouldn't be the one to make that call.
we can develop a report that we don't. You don't want the report that we currently have, because it literally goes, wire, piping. It's very, very, very specific. It's in my bag. It's a pretty decent packet, but we can come up with. There's probably a report that would have 25 or 28, maybe 30 different disciplines on it, and we can summarize that. We can summarize that for us. What we do see, I will admit, right, there is, in each one of these budgets, depending on exactly how they're done, there's this variance report that's produced. The numbers that you're seeing here, right? I got this on Monday the 15th, I think it was. And then it was digested and then formalized, and all the numbers that you guys are looking at on the screen now are from that. That's even why it changed since we had a conversation last Tuesday. That's why some of the numbers have changed, because of that further refinement of some of those things. We consistently meet with the Elford team and the MSA team to understand those numbers. But yeah, we can produce a little bit more granularity on basically the $51 million. Sure.
Thank you. And would you mind forwarding the slide deck to Mr. Van Meters so we can make it part of the record too? Thank you so much. All right, that's all that I have for now. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for me, but first, a big thank you for the presentation so far, and for everyone for being here. But thank you for the team from MSA for hosting several of us on Friday. Really appreciated the opportunity to do the 3D walkthrough. I found that very helpful. Question as it relates to your slide that had the allowances, I believe, with the pluses and minuses. So as of now, the stormwater bioswales would be an additional cost that is not planned for at the moment?
Correct. Of that, I want to say that if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, of the 319,000, that was the smallest of them, which was under 30,000. So we would anticipate that being constructed.
Okay.
Again, when we see the bids come in and we see them come in, which the folks say that we would see them come in lower, that's where we would say, okay, add this now in, add this now in, add this now in. So no additional cost to the 69 million per se, but we also wouldn't be seeing that savings either.
Thank you.
A portion of that savings.
One more question, Mr. Chair. And then broadly speaking, we've talked about this new municipal complex being the home for the city for 50 years.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's important for our residents to know that that is the plan. We want this to be our home, not only, as Ms. Bowers said, for staff and elected officials, but for the community the next 50 years. Could you speak maybe in broad terms about what is being used and implemented to make that possible?
Yeah, so some of the original assumptions on the particular facility, I'm going to point to the middle of this slide, and the essential facility code requirements, right? Those while a very big challenge, if you would, in this particular building, right? This particular building was not constructed at the time. It was constructed as an office building and not an essential facility. But what that's really given us the ability to do, it's really given us the ability to upgrade the structure in total, improving the life expectancy of a building. Everything has a shelf life, right? I mean, whether that's us or whether that's even a building, technology is another example, right? Everything has a shelf life, but we've now upgraded the building significantly to the point where we really feel that that 50-year mark is achievable in this particular facility. The amenities that are going into the building, the thought that's being put to make sure that we're not just planning the building for tomorrow, but we're actually planning the building for future generations to come is also important. While we can't necessarily get into the nitty-gritty about expansion space and all of the different details around the building and some of the conversation that we've had, right? But there is space inside of this particular building that if a department did need to grow, or if, when we do have a parks and service complex, what happens in those particular areas, do those folks move out of the building, then increasing the size and space for additional staff to maybe work out of this particular facility. Those things have been taken into consideration. We haven't necessarily agonized over those particular items, but we have really tested the space program on this particular building and the design so that we know that it works for tomorrow when we actually move into the building, but then it again works for 30 and 40 years down the road. The other note that I will make too is that I talked a little bit about the quality of the space and the size of the space. Today, we might be dealing with an 8x8 cubicle, but that's not to say that, it's all modular furniture at some particular point in time, so that if you did need to add a couple people into a particular area, the furniture is also flexible enough in order to make some adjustments, and then also add people without necessarily having to knock down walls or add walls for that matter, so on and so forth. So I think that is also another advantage. I didn't mention it earlier, but another advantage to that open office concept. And this is really going to be a facility that I think that, when we're all gray-haired, well, I don't know that I'll ever be gray-haired, but anyway, that when we're all gray-haired, that we have the ability to look back on this building and really say that we've done this in a way and in a fashion that was, one, unique to the way in which other municipalities address their facility problems. We are addressing, and part of the challenge here, I think it's very important to note, is that we are addressing three major needs and three major concerns all in one project. And when you look at a different municipality, maybe one of our neighbors here in Central Ohio, they're addressing this one very small and specific thing, and that's great, and that's maybe the way in which they need to do it. But maybe their challenges are slightly different than ours, so they have the ability to do that, right? But our challenges have been such that this really gives us the opportunity to fix both the police department, city administration, and then obviously the needs of the seniors for, again, not just tomorrow, but then for, again, generations to come.
Thank you. That's all for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything further from council? Yeah, Mrs. McGregor.
Just back to this multi-purpose room, it seems like that's one of the main things the public will use is that room. And I feel bad that it's being cut back. 15%, is the cost benefit that much that?
If I'm remembering my numbers correctly, I hesitate to turn around and look at my MSA friends or my Elford friends. I want to say it was around about $750,000 savings in that reduction.
It seems like we're making it for 50 years, and, when they built this building, they didn't even use much of the second floor Columbus State used, and we eventually filled it in. But, it seems like
So part of the, and this goes to the futureness of the building, right? So we're hoping that in maybe not in 25 years, but maybe more in 10 or 15 years, that we have maybe a community center where some of those needs, wants, and desires could also be accommodated at that particular time. So again, that was kind of the balancing act, if you would, between build it as big as the 175 people, or scale it back a little bit to maybe meet a little bit of a better parameter as it related to ultimately what you see there at the end of the line. I know that the folks behind me, I know that they could spend money with the best of them. So if it's a conversation that we want to have with having it be put back in, we can definitely have that conversation.
I'm going to go to Ms. Jones and then Ms. Padova.
Yeah, so thank you again for the presentation. I have a question back on the plus and minuses and really about, I guess, priority. So as bids are coming in and let's say, we can add things, how do you know of these where to start? Or what is the process in which we say, we can add some of these things? Is there a priority order or a process in which we decide? Is it just down to dollars?
I think at that point, I think it's just, I think it's going to be, end up being down to dollars.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it being, again, less than that 1%, I don't necessarily know. That's why we had a conversation on Thursday as to whether or not this slide should be in there or not.
Yeah.
Or if we take that 319 and just add it to the budget now. And it was, you know what? Instead of complicating the matter, this is how we have the numbers, let's present them as it is. And again, these are, they would technically be for future consideration if those bids were coming in high. If those bids are coming in low or, and they can easily accommodate that 319, then we would like to obviously build, as an example there, or we'd like to not build, but mill and overlay the rear parking lot. We can also meet with our engineering friends down the hall here and basically say, okay, and our Parks and Rec friends for that matter, who do parking lot projects all the time, and what's the useful life of that particular parking lot, and then what do we think it would cost in 4 or 5 years in order to rebuild it, and does it make sense to spend, I think that particular ticket item was about $160,000 to do it today, versus waiting 3 or 4 years down the road, because maybe you need to do a full-scale replacement at that particular point, and it's not worth waiting. Again, those are some of the conversations that we're still kind of going through.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Padova?
Thank you. Thank you guys all for all of your hard work getting us this far. To Nancy's point, what is just to kind of put it into perspective, what is the capacity of the current senior center?
I'm going to stumble on the square footage. I'm not broadcasting my slide, so I actually can look up a slide for you and give you good numbers. Bear with me
And
1 second.
More specifically,
Yes, ma'am.
the occupancy than the square footage.
While Kevin is looking that up, we just actually had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. So Kevin went over and actually measured the existing square footage of the existing senior center, include everything from the offices to the kitchen to the usable space from the seniors, the art room, and then compared that to the space that they would get, that they will be getting over at 825 Tech Center Drive, to put that in comparison. I was sitting, as we were talking, I was trying to remember the numbers myself. I don't remember the numbers, but it was significantly different in favor of the usable space that they would have over at the senior center versus what they currently have at this time. Did I tap dance enough for you to find it?
No, ma'am, keep dancing. I think I'm close. Yes, I'm close. Here's my slide. I don't have occupancy numbers, so I apologize there. But the multipurpose room, so when we're all said and done, the room that we're constructing is 1,900 square feet. That also includes not just the room itself, but also the pre-function area, right? That's also an area that we need to take into consideration when talking about that particular space. Right now, they have really no lounge over in that particular facility, right? I think there's two round tables in with the staff desks, and I think that's what we refer to as the lounge. They're getting about 8,000 square feet in the new facility, in this particular facility here. And of functional programming space. So if we take out the offices over in our building, over in our existing building, that's 2,500 and another 270, so less than 3,000 square feet of programmable space. And right now on my list here, which is not summed up, we're dealing with a significant increase in square footage overall. The art room as an example, the art room being designed here is about 800 square feet, but the art room in the existing facility is about 635 square feet and also doesn't contain any storage, right? So my 800 square foot is just programmable space, has nothing to do with the storage of art equipment and pottery wheels and those types of things. The kiln room, as another example, is designed for 2 kilns as opposed to just 1. And the kitchen is of significant increase as well, which will be a demo kitchen, right? So you can hold a cooking class and doing different things in the demo kitchen that you're not capable of doing in our kitchen here. So again, I apologize, and I can while Miss Berry does her portion, I can I can do a little summations here and maybe we revisit this in a couple minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further down on that end? Looking to the right, anything over here? I just have just one, I suppose, clarifying question, Mr. Schultz, and of course, thank you for the high level of detail here, but I'm just wondering for anybody that might be watching at home that's kind of looking for a bottom line figure or takeaway from all of this, is it safe to say that that roughly 69 million or 70 million figure is, for again, lack of a better word or phrase, the worst case scenario?
I would rather refer to that as the ceiling, yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, perfect. So I suppose that concludes the, Mrs. McGregor, one more.
Just that slide there, what was the cost, before we knew about this building, what were you estimating the cost of the police station to buy the land and build the building?
I have that number here in my presentation. $82 million without the purchase of the land,
82 million without the purchase of land for just the police station?
just the police station. That's new construction of a police station, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then they needed, I want to say, 5 to 7 acres. If you even just throw a modest number at it, $2 million for land, which is very modest. So you're at 84. That's also a number that was also generated 2 years ago at this particular point as well.
I always think we should say that because it just shows how much value we're getting for this property in the building versus individual buildings.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you.
thank
If
you.
memory serves me correctly, it was Director Vollmer that threw out the phrase, buy one, get two, or buy one, get three, was that it? But, yeah, it was more than BOGO, yeah. It was- Perfect. So the construction portion's over, I guess we're turning it over to Finance. Ms. Burry, you want to kick that off? Thank you.
So I'm going to throw a whole bunch more numbers at you, which is going to be fun. So the first thing we're going to talk about is looking at the total cost and what we have in front of you for consideration for cash and what some cash consideration has already been placed out there that we've been using for the design and engineering. So the first thing that we looked at, working with Baker Tilly and Squires, we pulled out our debt policy to make sure are we checking all the boxes. So our debt policy says we're going to use general obligation debt for capital purposes. Check that box. We're not going to exceed 30 years in duration. Got that box checked. We're going to find a resource to repay it. While the analysis that I'm going to give you really just focuses on the capital improvement fund, keep in mind there are other capital resources or other resources that are in the ordinance that we're going to be able to use to offset some of the debt service. But this is mainly going to focus on what impact is this having on the capital improvement fund and the general fund. So identified our resource. We're going to use the issue 12 capital improvement dollars as a resource for repayment. Are we going to find some alternate financing? We're already working on that, identifying, investigating, and applying for that alternate financing. So we've checked that box. And what cash do we have available? So coming from that unreserved capital improvement fund and unreserved general fund balance, looking at how we could use that cash financing to our benefit. So looking at that furniture, fixtures, and equipment, if we do want to go out for a longer duration, that gives us the ability to do that. And then looking at contingencies and allowances, do we really want to bond and pay interest on dollars that we may not end up spending? So those are the kind of things that we looked at in coming up with some of the financing packages and getting the ordinance in front of you all. So why the $68 million in 30 years in the ordinance when we already know that we have in front of you some cash financing items that we could potentially go forward with, and seeing that kind of brings us down to about $57 million. We want some flexibility, right? But we also want to make sure that we have a hard stop where we know we have to come back to you. So if anything unforeseen were to happen, this gives me the authority as the finance director to go up to $68 million as we kind of work through the process, figure out what that duration looks like, and go up to 30 years. More than likely, we're never going to get to that maximum. We're not going to probably get to that duration because we have a recommendation coming up. But just the reason why it's in there that way kind of gives us the ability to move forward. If something unforeseen were to happen, we don't have to waste time and money coming back and saying, oh, by the way, now we need more. So kind of giving us that max where we could stop at. Go to the next slide. So Baker Tilly and Squires worked with me to come up with a couple different financing packages. We came up with 4. That top chart is the one that we're recommending that's preferred. It has the $10 million in cash financing, bringing a total issuance amount estimated to be about $57.5 million for a 25-year term. Over that 25-year term, there'll be total debt service of about $96.4 million, which equates to about 3.9 in annual debt service. That center box that compares it to the other 3 financing packages that were brought forward. So we had a 25-year option with no cash down. Compared to the one that we're recommending, so the debt or the financing package that we're recommending, compared to that one, have debt service savings of about $5.5 million. Looking below that $5.5 million in debt service savings that we're realizing by going with the top box that we're recommending, we would have less debt service, which will give us a little bit more cash flow. But kind of looking at what our savings would be and what that additional cash flow we might have for additional capital projects, does it really pan out when we look at going toward that middle box when we're looking at how that compares to a 30-year and the cash savings with cash outlay. We have about $7.4 million in estimated debt service savings by going with that option on the top. We're going to pay a little bit more in debt service with the option that we're recommending on the top, but only about $400,000 more. And in the grand scheme of things from year to year and the capital that we have, really isn't going to help out much with that capital improvement plan, even though we're going to pay a little bit more towards the debt service. Looking at the last one was a 30-year with no cash. So the comparison to what we're recommending is the biggest savings there, right? So you have debt service savings over the life of about $14 million. Here we would spend a little bit less in debt service annually, but again, not a really significant amount. So looking at how that compared to those other 3 possibilities, this just seemed like the clear path to go forward. What does that do to the capital improvement fund? The last item on this slide talks about the estimated annual dollars for other capital projects. So once we make that debt service payment, this is what we're estimating we'll have available on average per year for other capital. The second slide you have here is just informational. Just wanted to give you what those other terms, the cash financing was, and what the estimated issuances would be, the debt service, and then what the estimated annual debt service would be. This basically just supports that first slide. You could take that top box, do the same comparisons, and come up with those same results that we had on that first slide. So this is looking at the cash flow for the capital improvement fund over that 30-year period, looking at all 4 of those different financing packages. You'll notice why the debt's outstanding, pretty similar, depending on which one we go with. Also looking at the resources on this. So when I did the cash flow analysis and looking at the income that was coming in, you'll see those kind of dips in there. That's where I'm stressing the income tax, right? Kind of taking into account those normal economic cycles that happen where we're going to have some economic downturns and we're going to recover. So taking those into consideration, those are kind of where those dips are. The red and gold bars that are kind of sticking up there as you're kind of going through, as we're going through the debt service, that's that 30-year issuance and the 25 with no cash. So those are what gives you a little bit more flexibility for more outflow as you're paying off the debt, but looking at how little that is kind of from year to year. What I really want to focus on is that tail end. So the gray and the blue bars that are kind of sticking up on that tail end, that's taking advantage of that 25-year maturity and seeing how quickly then we could get boosted back into additional resources for additional capital improvement planning and other projects. So this is kind of that recommendation behind that 25-year is also based on how that cash flow kind of pays out, and paying it off 5 years earlier, how much more that or capital capacity it gives us at the tail end of that 30 years. Next, and the final thing that I'm going to present is what does that $7 million do to the general fund? So this should look very familiar to you. This is from the budget book. Starts with the general fund appropriations for 2024. This is not including the $7 million because that's a one-time capital. Coming down to what our total operating appropriations are, showing that our emergency reserve still calculates out as it did during the budget process at $8.45 million. Looking at that projected ending fund balance, so that is the difference that you're going to see if you do flip back to the budget book. This $34.1 million is based on actual 2023 numbers. So in the budget book, that number was smaller because we were basing it off the 2023 budget at the time and assuming that we were only going to get what we planned and we were going to spend everything that we appropriated. So this is actual data based on 2023 actual results that we're estimating that based on that 2023 actual, what we're estimating for appropriations, that our fund balance is estimated to end in 2024 at $34.1 million. Taking out the emergency reserve, we're not going to touch that. That is going to stay intact. And then taking out the set aside for the contingencies and allowances of $7 million leaves us with an estimated fund balance at the end of 2024 using that $7 million of about 18.7. Going to the bottom of the chart reflects what that means in accordance to our fund balance policy, leaving us with almost 7 months, which is more than 3 times what is required by policy. As a reminder, policy is 2 months of unreserved, so we're still in a good spot compared to our policy and allows us to use it and keep the emergency reserve as is. So that's the general fund impact behind using the $7 million. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Brian's going to talk about the current market conditions and how we will be rated, what Moody's uses to determine our rating for the actual bond issuance.
Thanks, Joanne. Hello again on the back end. Welcome back. This is a look back of the 10-year AAA MMD. This is the benchmark from which all tax-exempt debt is priced. You can see a fairly active market here looking back from 2014. Most recently, you can see the peak on the far right-hand side of the graph of interest rates in October, where 10-year MMD was over 3.5%. Since the Fed changed its tone in the later part of this year, we've seen that MMD rate drop to about 2.25. That is a very good sign for the city. That means the cost of borrowing for the city is going down over the short term. The next slide shows the current MMD yield curve. So this is the same data, only it is a year-by-year depiction of current rates. The blue bar is, again, the peak in October. October 23rd is the approximate peak. And then we show rates where they started on January 2nd, 2024 in red, and then current rates. You can see that gap, that pickup in interest rates. The lower the rates, the better things are for the city. So overall favorable, the Fed, and I think the market predicts and is expecting further cuts this year. So as we go on in the year, hopefully rates continue to come down. We could have some volatility based on news cycles and other factors, but generally it's a more favorable time to issue than say last year. The other question that commonly comes up, next slide, is about the city's credit rating. The city is currently rated by Moody's Investor Services. They're rated AA1, which is the second highest. I'm sorry, that slide is not the right slide, but The city is currently rated AA1 from Moody's. It's a very strong credit rating. That's the second highest category. A lot of folks like to know what will happen to our rating when we issue new debt. Your general obligation is actually based on a number of factors other than just your outstanding debt. That would include your economy, your finances, and your leverage, your debt and institutional framework. So Moody's last looked at the city's credit rating on March of 2023 and confirmed the AA1. We since have an updated audit. It looks very good. The city's financial condition is very strong. And we looked at Moody's scorecard with those current numbers and assuming an additional issuance of $68 million. And what we see is that we would expect that the city's credit rating would hold at AA1. So we would expect the same rating outcome, a very strong rating, and a positive results going through the debt issuance cycle, reflecting the city's strong reserves and financial position. We're going to do next steps, we're going to do the calendar next, and and we're going to go to Miranda.
All right, Ms. Vollmer, and then I assume we'll open it up to council.
Sure. Sorry, I can click other slides, just not my own. So on the screen now, you have a timeline and dependency calendar here. So the items in blue represent bond and financing timelines. The items in white represent construction timelines. So the month of February, the primary focus of February is bond legislation and preparing the official statement and related rating agency materials. As we get down and move into March, you'll see where the weeks start to line up with the bond pricing and setting of interest rates for Series A, along with construction contract number 1. So bid documents will be reviewed by the project team to introduce construction contract 1 at the end of March. The construction contracts and the bond pricing and interest are important to track along the same weeks. This is to ensure that bond pricing is in the correct amount so the project continues on time and without delay. Construction bids are generally good for 30 days. Therefore, it is vital for the construction contract and bond closure to be issued near each other. This will allow, when the bond closes, this will allow Director Burry to sign the fiscal certification, and notice to proceed will be issued to Alford. This will allow Alford to execute construction contract 1 in mid-April. Ultimately, this timeline of dependencies ultimately allow the construction to begin on time in April. And then you'll see below during the months of May for construction contract 2 and bond pricing and setting of interest rates for Series B, they line up as well, so that the notice to proceed and fiscal certifications can be issued there at the beginning of June on construction contract number 2. So we're happy to answer any questions. We can go back to any slides. And just one note, when Director Burry was presenting, when she talked about the revenue numbers that she predicted, those are based on today's revenue that she's predicted. So obviously that's based on the information she has today.
Thank you. Anything from council on the, I guess, the financing in general, bonds, cash? Ms. Bowers?
You guys better not leave me out here with the only one having questions. Okay. Let me start just with this slide, Director Vollmer, really quickly, just to clarify a couple things. I had in some of my notes from when we met earlier that there would be more opportunity for project discussion with council February to early March. I don't necessarily see that reflected here, but that may just not have made it into this slide. And so I just wanted to confirm, because some of my colleagues may not have had as much opportunity to see some of the details and be able to really talk that through and kind of give some input there.
So this is just approvals, right? So this is council actions and then signatures and contracts beginning. We will still have the opportunity like, for example, this comes back in 2 weeks, right? So we'll be back here ready to answer more questions and additional questions, and then we'll have all the way up through, I'm not as familiar with the schedule, but the construction contract 1 presented to council, right? So we will be talking about this in length between now and until you guys get tired of hearing from us.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that and make sure that we had further opportunity, kind of going back to Ms. Jones' point about giving some input on some of those alternatives that were
Absolutely.
suggested, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Okay. I had some questions for Mr. Cooper, and these go into Ms. Burry's presentation as well. Ms. Burry, admittedly, I grasped maybe like a fraction of what you presented, so I'm going to ask some questions that maybe you addressed in your presentation, but I didn't understand. So if I understand correctly, the specific bonds that you're going to be recommending and pursuing are 25-year term bonds that account for the proposed cash contribution that's also being requested along with the bond legislation tonight. So, and then also kind of going in line with that, Mr. Cooper spoke about the general obligation bonds. Could you two speak a little bit more to alternatives or other choices on the menu and why you're presenting the recommendations that you're presenting tonight versus the general obligation bond?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. So the two big choices for cities bonding debt for governmental purposes are a general obligation bond and a revenue bond. When you issue a general obligation bond, that's a full faith and credit pledge, and it offers the best security. And what you get out of that is the lowest possible interest rate for borrowing. The alternative to that would be a revenue pledge, and you could do, if you so choose, for example, an income tax revenue bond. Now, the difference between a general obligation and an income tax revenue bond is when you shift to a revenue bond structure, you narrow the available amount of security down to a very specific revenue stream. And investors see that and recognize that, and typically charge a premium for that, so you pay a higher interest rate. The credit analysts, Moody's, will also look at that, and they'll say, okay, well, if the city's general obligation rating is a AA1, and you're not doing a full faith and credit pledge, you're only pledging to repay with income tax, they're going to say, well, there's less security available. Income taxes are more subject to economic winds, and they might put a lower rating on that specific revenue stream, resulting in a higher interest rate cost for the project. Beyond that, there's some other alternatives that are done more for legal reasons, debt limit reasons, such as certificates of appropriation or certificates of participation or lease purchase type transactions. But those then again have a higher rate of borrowing for those options. So what we did was we quickly moved to the lowest cost option. If you have the legal authority, there's no debt limit problems, you have very strong financial health, and in fact, as a general reference, you should use your highest and best credit as much as you can to lower the cost of borrowing over time.
What are the risks of using a general obligation bond versus a revenue bond?
The risks to the city?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. One risk would be that you could hit your debt limits. When you issue general obligation bonds, they're subject to certain limits. We've done some initial calculations on those debt limits, and we can get into them if you like, but even post-issuance, your borrowing limits would be greater than I believe it was $80 million. So even after that, even after this issuance, you'll still have plenty of general obligation capacity.
80 million is the city's total debt limit capacity, or that 80 plus 60?
80 plus 60 for the 10 mil limit. So there's two debt limits that you're subject to when you issue general obligation bonds. The first is a direct debt limit. And since the ordinance also notes income tax availability and other revenues, these bonds are exempt from the direct debt limit. So there is essentially no tangible limit on the direct limit for you all right now. That's limited to 5.5% and 10.5% of voted and unvoted debt. But you're not subject to that because you're pledging income tax. The second is the 10 mil limit. And what's tricky about that is that the 10 mil limit is a limit that's applicable to the city and all the other taxing jurisdictions. So the school district, SWACO, the county, and the maximum millage available under the 10 mil is 10. And so with your issue, plus all of the other outstanding issues for the city, the schools, the county, and other taxing jurisdictions, that total is about 6 mils, six and a half mils, which leaves about 4.5 mils of capacity. That 4.5 mils can be used by anyone. And so if another party goes out and issues debt and takes up all that extra millage, that 4 mils, then theoretically you could have no additional 10 mil limit to issue bonds. If that happens, in theory, then and the city needed to issue bonds, then the next best route would be to issue revenue bonds, coming full circle, issuing income tax revenue bonds, because that would be your second best option when going into the market.
Thank you. Is there, let me ask this question's an easy one for a slightly different topic, but are we permitted to call the bond before its maturity date?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's optional redemption language in the ordinance. The final terms of that optional redemption will be determined in the certificate of award signed by Ms. Burry once we price the bonds. So let's say we go to market with a 25-year term, which is the recommendation. The standard optional redemption timeline would be 10 years. We can go a little shorter than that. Probably without a penalty, we could probably get away with a 9-year call. And so that means that you have 9 years or 10 years before you can either refinance the bonds or pay them off early. We can go even shorter than 9 or 10 years, but there's a cost to that, a cost to the city of going shorter. And so shortly before we go out and price the bonds, we do an analysis, we talk with the finance director and determine what the best call option is for the city. And ultimately, the finance director chooses that option, and then that would allow the city at a future date to either pay off early or refinance the bonds if conditions permitted it. And these are good questions, by the way.
Thanks. I mean, we take this topic, I mean, this is a very serious issue, right? I mean, it has a massive impact on, not just us sitting here, but everyone in the community now and 20, 30 years from now. So, I think that this is not something that we're just taking lightly, and it's a very serious decision, and take our role as stewards of public dollars incredibly seriously. So I know we've got an expert who's in this field, and I'm sure he'll have some good questions too, but from a, kind of quasi-lay perspective, I guess I want to make sure that I'm asking the right questions and asking a lot of questions so that we can explain this to our community too.
Can I ask a follow-up based on what you?
Yes, and then I will circle back if that's okay.
Yeah, Ms. Weaver, you have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the, I guess, the calling of the bonds and an attempt to refinance. So there would be no advantage to the city then to issue an even shorter term bond in the hope that the interest rates would be lower. So the reason I'm asking is the way I understood what you were saying, Mr. Cooper, is that if we were to look to refinance, we would have to wait till years 9 or 10 in order to do that without penalty. And based on the head shaking as I was posing my question, there is no advantage to going for a shorter term bond.
A shorter term bond or a shorter call date?
Shorter term bond
Okay.
in the hope that the market might shift in favor sooner for a better interest rate, although from your slide, much better than personal rates, right?
So they did provide some shorter durations, but when I ran the numbers, we just don't have the cash flow for it. It would seriously impact our ability to do other projects. So that's why we stuck with what we knew we had capacity to work with. So we ran some 20-year numbers, 25 and 30, and the 25 and 30 is where we kind of land cash flow-wise, to not put ourselves in any jeopardy of not being able to do other things.
It wouldn't be dissimilar if you think about your home mortgage, for example, and if you were to go for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and then if you looked at refinancing to a 20-year fixed rate, you might say, hey, that rate looks a lot better, the rate is lower, but since there's 5 years or 10 years less of amortization, the annual payment goes way up. And so you save on interest and you save on interest carry, but it will start to chip into that $9.9 million of other annual dollars for capital projects. So you could do a shorter bond. It's just going to cost you more year to year.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then just a second quick follow-up, if I may, Ms. Bauer. I appreciated the comments earlier about we're looking at a max of 68 million and anticipate being under that. There's no advantage to splitting that, seeking an initial, for say, initial 30 million and then wait a few months to see if.
That's exactly what we're planning on doing.
Oh, wonderful. See,
So-
I've learned.
So you're approaching a financial expert, at least,
Oh, thank you.
even
Thank
in
you.
this short period of time. So the construction planning is complex, especially for this project. It's been broken into 2 GMP contracts. And what the city doesn't want to do is it doesn't want to overissue. So you don't want to issue 68 if you only need 58. And you don't want to issue 58 if you need 68, right? And so what we've done for the plan of finance is break the bonds into 2 series. We're going to do a series in March so that the numbers don't get too confusing. We're going to take the note out and we're going to fund $20 million of GMP1. And then we're going to conclude the construction planning process. And the second series will use to fine-tune not only how much construction dollars we need, but how much cash the city wants to use so that we issue just the right amount of funds at the end of the construction planning so that we don't have too much and we don't have too little.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. I stole Ms. Bowers'
No.
thunder, so.
It's all right. Well, that kind of piggybacks a little bit in terms of not just the timing of issuing the bonds, but would there be any value to splitting the type of bond between general revenue versus, general obligation and revenue?
My personal recommendation, I would say no, and that is because we haven't hit a debt limit or a hurdle in issuing your highest and best type of credit. If we issued that first 20 million, let's say, and then we hit that limit and we didn't have capacity, then yes, we would recommend charting a different path and a different type of security. But at the end of the day, if we used a different type of security for the second series, just as a for instance, it would likely create a higher interest rate for the city at the end of the day.
So because we have the capacity to use general obligation bonds, that's absolutely the first thing that you go to?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Anything further? If you're on a roll, I'll just let you keep
Yeah,
rolling.
I think I have one more.
Okay.
You mentioned, Mr. Cooper, that we're expected to hold at the AA1 bond rating after the issuance of the debt. Could you share with us things that we need to be alert to that could affect or lower that? Or what do we need to do to ensure that that rating holds?
So the rating will be based on your newly released audit, which I'm sure you guys have, I'm sure Joanne has presented to you all. The things that could create a rating upgrade or downgrade for the city would include, so on the upgrade side, on the upside, improvement in your demographic and wealth factors, assessed value, tax base. Those are going to be things that will gradually push your rating up, potentially to the AAA rating category. Things that are likely to bring your rating down is additional funding additional debt. Now you still have some capacity, and it's not like a light switch. Because if you have a capital plan and a source of repayment, that will add to it. But things like drawing down on your general fund cash balances sustained over time, that could lead to a downgrade. If we went into an economic downturn and your income taxes were severely impacted, let's say you had a 10 or 15% reduction in your income tax collections, and that started to strain your operations. Those are all things that would lead to downward pressure on your rating and a potential downgrade scenario.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is that all?
I'm good now.
Okay. No, those are
Thank
good
you.
questions, both of you. Mrs. McGregor.
I have two. What other bonds are we paying on still?
So we still have our 2013 and 2015 refunding. That's where we refunded the 2007 and 2005 issuances. Those are both, those both mature in one is in 2030 and the other one is in 2035. That issuance, I guess it was a 2016 issuance, was also the new money for the Detroit street rebuilds. So that's the portion that's kind of going out a little bit further into 2035. And then we also have the judgment bonds that were issued related to the income tax lawsuit that will mature in 2030. So in the grand scheme of things, we have our outstanding debt is maturing pretty much in the near future, except for the 15 issuance, which is just going out 5 years further to 2035.
Mrs. McGregor, can I ask, what were the old bonds that you mentioned for?
2005 and 2007?
Yeah.
So the 2005 bonds were improvements to the Morrison Road. I'm going off of memory, so I might have to do a correction on that too. And then 2007, there was a lot of work done technology-wise, and then there was a park associated with that. There were, so both the 2005 and 2007 issuances both had multiple projects within them. So I think the 2005 issuance had 4 projects that were outlined in there, and the 2007 issuance had more, because it had some utility work. So it had some water, stormwater, and sewer line work that was also done as part of that 2007. So there was a large amount of items that were covered with both of those issuances.
Sure. Did we at one time have a AAA bond rating?
I don't believe we were ever AAA.
Okay. I thought there was, but I was just going to ask when that changed, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, since I've been here, and actually before I even came on board, so going back as long as I could think of Gahanna, I can't remember them getting to a AAA.
Okay.
It's very hard for municipalities in Ohio to achieve that just because we don't have a lot of diversity available for us as far as revenue and resources. A lot of that falls to the state, where in other states, municipalities may have an easier time getting to that rating because they have the ability to have a more diverse revenue stream.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Nancy, on the topic of credit ratings, I'm sure you remember when it was much lower than what it is now. On the topic of credit ratings, I'm sure you remember when it was much lower than that, back in, what, the 80s at some point in time?
I don't know.
I thought the city, yeah, I thought it was considerably lower back then. Anything further from council on this particular topic? All right, I have a couple. So the question, and honestly, I forget who mentioned it. I don't know if it was Miranda or Joanne, if it was you, but there was some conversation about all of the available revenue sources. And I thought I heard enterprise system revenue. I thought I heard TIFs. So I guess my question is particularly given the water revenue and the sewer revenue, would these potentially qualify as double-barreled? And I don't know if maybe our friends from Squire want to weigh in on that particular topic.
Binkley from Squire. So technically, we would not consider them double barrel. We don't see those very often. It would truly just be a general obligation, but we include that language in there really for debt limit purposes, not only to allow Joanne to use those revenues to repay the debt, but under the direct debt limits, when we include that language and we know that the city is able to use revenues from those sources, it allows that debt to be exempt from the direct debt limit.
Of course. And as I'm sure Mr. Cooper can attest, investors love to hear that language.
Yes.
So I would say prominently feature it in the official statement.
It is in the official statement, yes.
Perfect, thank you. The other question I have is in regards to, Kevin had talked about a ceiling. If the ceiling is not reached, where the savings are seen, where would that sort of manifest? Would that be in cash not spent, or would we reduce the size of presumably a Series B bond issuance?
So I think our initial thought is that we would reduce that Series B.
Okay.
That our plan is to still to use that cash, just because of the savings associated with it, and we have the ability to do it. So that's our initial thought pattern, is that if we end up not reaching that ceiling, or a lot of those come off, we just we'll only bond what we need.
Understood. Thank you. The other question I have on my pad here is, are you recommending a negotiated sale for one or both series, or would you advise the city to pursue competitive bids for either of the bond deals?
So my recommendation would be to do a competitive sale.
Perfect.
Yeah, these
Do you-
are
Do you
highly.
feel like there's a benefit to maybe discussing what the difference is?
There is definitely a benefit to that. So when the city sells bonds, there's three, but there's two main ways to sell bonds. The first is through what we call a negotiated bond sale. And a negotiated issue is where you appoint an underwriter in advance, and their main responsibility is to market and sell the bonds. So they do the marketing, and come pricing date, which is the date you set the rates on the bonds, the city is negotiating the levels the interest rate levels with the underwriter that they're going to bring out into the market and sell. That process then puts the sale into the underwriter's hands. They go out and solicit buyers for the bonds, and you go through that process once or twice in a day to arrive at a final negotiated pricing. Again, that's done with a single underwriter for this type of bond in advance. A competitive sale is when the city will prepare all of the offering documents, the rating, and a notice of sale, and distribute that to the market, essentially distributes it to all the underwriters that are participating in the market, and says, the city's selling these bonds on 11 o'clock on Thursday, bids are due at this time, and all the underwriters who are interested in purchasing the bonds submit a bid, and the bonds are awarded to the underwriter that offers the lowest interest rate, i.e. the highest price for the bonds. And so with a highly rated general obligation bond with a credit that's fairly well known, and no special features, no special option calls, no special structure, no special legal parameters, if I were the finance director, I would want to do a competitive sale, because I think that's going to get you your best price on the day of the sale.
Thank you both. What I'll just piggyback off of from my council colleagues is going back to, there was quite a bit of discussion about general obligation versus revenue and so forth. I agree completely with a AA1 rated general obligation bond. It will likely be highly or well received by the market via competitive sale, whereas if you were going with something that was a little bit less security, as you've described, Mr. Cooper, a negotiated sale might be more appropriate. So it seems like what you're recommending is consistent with kind of how we're tapping the market. I guess this might provide some comfort for policymakers up here, but when you go competitive, what we can say is that we achieved the absolute lowest rate that we possibly could on that particular day. What we can't say is that that was the best day to sell bonds, but what we can say is that we got the absolute best rate. And so that's, as being resident-facing individuals, that's always a nice thing, or a nice feather in our cap, so to speak. And then, Mr. Cooper, I guess to allow you to flex your muscle here a little bit more, do you have a best guess for what the true interest cost might be on this deal?
Well,
at this moment
we
in
do
time?
do something quite fun.
For what, two of us in the room?
So I'm not sure that all municipal advisors do this, but the day of sale, the sale will happen let's say it will happen at 11 o'clock. So the night before, we'll send Joanne our pricing. So, and we'll be, I can say with confidence, we'll be very close to the market. We know where these bonds are going to price. I don't know the day of this scale, but we wrote a TIC, a true interest cost of a 366 for 25-year maturity level amortization. That might be 3 or 4 days old.
Perfect. Thank you. And the reason why I asked that question is I think it was Mr. Weaver that talked about some of the rates that were being presented on the slides being significantly lower than mortgage rates. And our primary source of revenue is, of course, income taxes. Theoretically, that's going to rise at roughly the rate of inflation. Inflation right now is somewhere north of 3. If you really think about it, that interest that we're paying is basically matched or very close to the rate of inflation over time. So it's almost as if it is essentially free money. So anyway, that's it for me. Anybody else have any further questions on this? Any closing comments from the administration? Mr. Schultz?
If I may just go back to Ms. Padova's question. So the programmable space inside of the senior center increases by 62% overall. Okay, right now they're dealing with about 2,800 square feet of programmable space. Doesn't include things like the offices or the bathrooms or the one storage room that they do have. They're going up to about 4,600 square feet in, again, just programmable space. So that doesn't, again, take into consideration the offices, the cubicle area, any of the storage, so on and so forth. So their programmable space increases by that 62%. I was questioning in my own head the $700,000 number that we gave you, and looking at Alfred's budgeting system, the number is actually $350,000 in the reduction of the multipurpose room, which it appears as if, thank you to Maria behind me, it looks like we reduced the multipurpose room by about 1,000 square feet. That also includes a small reduction in that pre-function area, which is the area before you enter into the multipurpose room area. So that is not one of the items that was on the bid alternate list, right? Because those are things that the design team would like to know more up front. You know, cutting a sally port in half, as an example, is a whole lot easier than extending the size of that multipurpose room. So if there was any intent on having a further conversation about the size of the multipurpose room, we would have to have that fairly quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate the more information on that, and it sounds like it's still going to increase substantially.
Correct.
And you feel that it will still be the right amount of space in 40 years from now, then I'm comfortable with that.
We'll hold you to it 40 years from now.
40 years from now?
Look into your glass ball there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if nothing further, I guess I'll address the calendar. So the ask for ordinance 0005-2024 is emergency but no waiver. So this will go on for first reading. I believe that is on the 5th. Council colleagues, any desire to see this come back after a very robust discussion here this evening? None? Okay. Jeremy, you got that one? All right. And then ordinance 0006-2024, this is the cash portion. The ask there is no emergency, no waiver. I assume the same. First reading on the 5th and no need to come back. Seeing some heads nod. Okay. All right. Perfect. Jeremy, you got all that? All right. Thanks, everyone. Thus concludes finance. Thank you.